Chapter 7 of The Valley of Fear by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 7. The Solution. Next morning, after breakfast, we found Inspector MacDonald and White Mason seated in close consultation in the small parlour of the local police sergeant. On the table in front of them were piled a number of letters and telegrams, which they were carefully sorting and docketing. 3 had been placed on one side. "Still on the track of the elusive bicyclist?" Holmes asked cheerfully. "What is the latest news of the ruffian?" MacDonald pointed ruefully to his heap of correspondence. "He is at present reported from Leicester, Nottingham, Southampton, Derby, East Ham, Richmond, and 14 other places. In 3 of them, East Ham, Leicester, and Liverpool, there is a clear case against him, and he has actually been arrested. This country seems to be full of the fugitives with yellow coats." "Dear me," said Holmes sympathetically. "Now, Mr. Mac, and you, Mr. White Mason, I wish to give you a very earnest piece of advice. When I went into this case with you, I bargained, as you will no doubt remember, that I should not present you with half-proved theories, but that I should retain and work out my own ideas until I had satisfied myself that they were correct. For this reason, I am not at the present moment telling you all that is in my mind. On the other hand, I said that I would play the game fairly by you, and I do not think it is a fair game to allow you for one unnecessary moment to waste your energies upon a profitless task. Therefore I am here to advise you this morning, and my advice to you is summed up in 3 words. Abandon the case." MacDonald and White Mason stared in amazement at their celebrated colleague. "You consider it hopeless?" cried the inspector. "I consider your case to be hopeless. I do not consider that it is hopeless to arrive at the truth." "But this cyclist is not an invention. We have his description, his valise, his bicycle. The fellow must be somewhere. Why should we not get him?" Yes, no doubt he is somewhere, and no doubt we shall get him. But I would not have you waste your energies in East Ham or Liverpool. I am sure that we can find some shorter cut to a result." "You're holding something back. It's hardly fair of you, Mr. Holmes." The inspector was annoyed. "You know my methods of work, Mr. Mac, but I will hold it back for the shortest time possible. I only wish to verify my details in one way, which can very readily be done, and then I make my bow and return to London, leaving my results entirely at your service. I owe you too much to act otherwise, for in all my experience I cannot recall any more singular and interesting study." "This is clean beyond me, Mr. Holmes. We saw you when we returned from Tunbridge Wells last night, and you are in general agreement with our results. What has happened since then to give you a completely new idea of the case?" "Well, since you ask me, I spent, as I told you that I would, some hours last night at the Manor House." "Well, what happened?" I can only give you a very general answer to that for the moment. By the way, I have been reading a short but clear and interesting account of the old building, purchasable at the modest sum of 1 penny from the local tobacconist. Here Holmes drew a small tract, embellished with a rude engraving of the ancient manor house, from his waistcoat pocket. "It immensely adds to the zest of an investigation, my dear Mr. Mac, when one is in conscious sympathy with the historical atmosphere of one's surroundings. Don't look so impatient, for I assure you that even so bald an account as this raises some sort of picture of the past in one's mind. Permit me to give you an example. Erected in the 5th year of the reign of James I, and standing upon the site of a much older building, the Manor House of Burleston presents one of the finest surviving examples of the moated Jacobean residence." "You're making fools of us, Mr. Holmes." "Tut, tut, Mr. Mac. The first sign of temper I have detected in you. Well, I won't read it verbatim, since you feel so strongly upon the subject, But when I tell you that there is some account of the taking of the place by a parliamentary colonel in 1644, of the concealment of Charles for several days in the course of the Civil War, and finally of a visit there by the second George, you will admit that there are various associations of interest connected with this ancient house.
I don't doubt it, Mr. Holmes, but that is no business of ours.
Is it not? Is it not? Breadth of view, my dear Mr. Mac, is one of the essentials of our profession. The interplay of ideas and the oblique uses of knowledge are often of extraordinary interest. You will excuse these remarks from one who, though a mere connoisseur of crime, is still rather older and perhaps more experienced than yourself.
I'm the first to admit that, said the detective heartily. You get to your point, I admit, but you have such a deuced round-the-corner way of doing it.
Well, well, I'll drop past history and get down to present-day facts. I called last night, as I have already said, at the Manor House. I did not see either Barker or Mrs. Douglas. I saw no necessity to disturb them, but I was pleased to hear that the lady was not visibly pining, and that she had partaken of an excellent dinner. My visit was specially made to the good Mr. Ames, with whom I exchanged some amiabilities which culminated in his allowing me, without reference to anyone else, to sit alone for a time in the study.
What? With that?
I ejaculated. No, no, everything is now in order. You gave permission for that, Mr. Mac. As I am informed, the room was in its normal state, and in it I passed an instructive quarter of an hour.
What were you doing?
Well, not to make a mystery of so simple a matter, I was looking for the missing dumb-bell. It has always bulked rather large in my estimate of the case. I ended by finding it.
Where?
Ah, there we come to the edge of the unexplored. Let me go a little further, a very little further, and I will promise that you shall share everything that I know.
Well, we're bound to take you on your own terms, said the inspector. But when it comes to telling us to abandon the case, why in the name of goodness should we abandon the case?
For the simple reason, my dear Mr. Mac, that you have not got the first idea what it is that you are investigating.
We are investigating the murder of Mr. John Douglas of Burleston Manor.
Yes, yes, so you are. But don't trouble to trace the mysterious gentleman upon the bicycle. I assure you that it won't help.
Then what do you suggest we do?
I will tell you exactly what to do, if you will do it.
Well, I'm bound to say, I've always found you had reason behind all your queer ways. I'll do what you advise.
And you, Mr. White Mason? The country detective looked helplessly from one to the other. Holmes and his methods were new to him.
Well, if it is good enough for the inspector, it's good enough for me, he said at last.
Capital, said Holmes. Well then, I should recommend a nice, cheery country walk for both of you. They tell me that the views from Burleston Ridge over the Weald are very remarkable. No doubt lunch could be got at some suitable hostelry, though my ignorance of the country prevents me from recommending one. In the evening, tired but happy—
Man, this is getting past a joke, cried MacDonald, rising angrily from his chair.
Well, well, spend the day as you like, said Holmes, patting him cheerfully upon the shoulder. Do what you like, and go where you will. But meet me here before dusk without fail. Without fail, Mr. Mac.
That sounds more like sanity.
All of it was excellent advice, but I don't insist so long as you are here when I need you. But now, before we part, I want you to write a note to Mr. Barker.
Well?
I'll dictate it if you like. Ready? Dear Sir, it has struck me that it is our duty to drain the moat, in the hope that we might find some—
It's impossible, said the inspector. I've made inquiry.
Tut, tut, my dear sir. Please do what I ask you.
Well, go on.
In the hope that we might find something which may bear upon our investigation.
I have made arrangements, and the workmen will be at work early tomorrow morning, diverting the stream." "Impossible!" "Diverting the stream, so I thought it best to explain matters beforehand. Now, sign that and send it by hand about 4 o'clock. At that hour we shall meet again in this room. Until then we may each do what we like, for I can assure you that this inquiry has come to a definite pause." Evening was drawing in when we reassembled. Holmes was very serious in his manner, myself curious, and the detectives obviously critical and annoyed. "Well, gentlemen," said my friend gravely, "I am asking you now to put everything to the test with me, and you will judge for yourselves whether the observations I have made justify the conclusions to which I have come. It is a chill evening, and I do not know how long our expedition may last, so I beg that you will wear your warmest coats. It is of the first importance that we should be in our places before it grows dark, so with your permission we shall get started at once." We passed along the outer bounds of the Manor House Park until we came to a place where there was a gap in the rails which fenced it. Through this we slipped, and then, in the gathering gloom, we followed Holmes until we had reached a shrubbery which lies nearby, opposite to the main door and the drawbridge. The latter had not been raised. Holmes crouched down behind a screen of laurels, and we all three followed his example. "Well, what are we to do now?" asked MacDonald with some gruffness. "Possess our souls in patience, and make as little noise as possible," Holmes answered. "What are we here for at all? I really think you might treat us with some more frankness." Holmes laughed. "Watson insists that I am the dramatist in real life," said he. "Some touch of the artist wells up within me, and calls insistently for a well-staged performance. Surely our profession, Mr. Mac, would be a drab and sordid one if we did not sometimes set the scene so as to glorify our results. The blunt accusation, the brutal tap upon the shoulder, what can one make of such a denouement? But the quick inference, the subtle trap, the clever forecast of coming events, the triumphant vindication of bold theories, are these not the pride and the justification of our life's work? At the present moment you thrill with the glamour of the situation and the anticipation of the hunt. Where would be that thrill if I had been as definite as a timetable? I only ask a little patience, Mr. Mac, and all will be clear to you." "Well, I hope the pride and justification and the rest of it will come before we all get our death of cold," said the London detective with comic resignation. We all had good reason to join in the aspiration, for our vigil was a long and bitter one. Slowly the shadows darkened over the long, sombre face of the old house. A cold, damp reek from the moat chilled us to the bones and set our teeth chattering. There was a single lamp over the gateway, and a steady globe of light in the fatal study. Everything else was dark and still. "How long is this to last?" asked the inspector finally. "And what is it we're waiting for?" "I have no more notion than you how long it is to last," Holmes answered with some asperity. "If criminals would always schedule their movements like railway trains, it would certainly be more convenient for all of us. As to what it is well, that's what we're watching for." As he spoke, the bright yellow light in the study was obscured by somebody passing to and fro before it. The laurels among which we lay were immediately opposite the window, and not more than 100 feet from it. Presently it was thrown open with a whining of hinges, and we could dimly see the dark outline of a man's head and shoulders looking out into the gloom. For some minutes he peered forth in furtive, stealthy fashion, as one who wishes to be assured that he is unobserved. Then he leaned forward, and in the intense silence we were aware of the soft lapping of agitated water. He seemed to be stirring up the moat with something which he held in his hand. Then suddenly he hauled something in as a fisherman lands a fish, some large round object which obscured the light as it was dragged through the open casement. "Now!" cried Holmes. "Now!" We were all upon our feet, staggering after him with our stiffened limbs, while he ran swiftly across the bridge and rang violently at the bell. There was the rasping of bolts from the other side, and the amazed Ames stood in the entrance. Holmes brushed him aside without a word, and, followed by all of us, rushed into the room which had been occupied by the man whom we had been watching. The oil lamp on the table represented the glow which we had seen from outside. It was now in the hand of Cecil Barker, who held it towards us as we entered. Its light shone upon his strong, resolute, clean-shaved face and his menacing eyes. "What the devil is the meaning of all this?" he cried. "What are you after, anyhow?" Holmes took a swift glance around, and then pounced upon a sodden bundle tied together with cord, which lay where it had been thrust under the writing-table. "This is what we are after, Mr. Barker. This bundle, weighted with a dumbbell which you have just raised from the bottom of the moat." Barker stared at Holmes with amazement in his face. "How in thunder came you to know anything about it?" he asked. "Simply that I put it there." "You put it there? You?" "Perhaps I should have said replaced it there," said Holmes. "You will remember, Inspector MacDonald, that I was somewhat struck by the absence of a dumbbell. I drew your attention to it, but with the pressure of other events you had hardly the time to give it the consideration which would have enabled you to draw deductions from it. When water is near and a weight is missing, it is not a very far-fetched supposition that something has been sunk in the water. The idea was at least worth testing, so with the help of Ames, who admitted me to the room, and the crook of Dr. Watson's umbrella, I was able last night to fish up and inspect this bundle. It was of the first importance, however, that we should be able to prove who placed it there. This we accomplished by the very obvious device of announcing that the moat would be dried tomorrow, which had of course the effect that whoever had hidden the bundle would most certainly withdraw it the moment that darkness enabled him to do so. We have no less than 4 witnesses as to who it was who took advantage of the opportunity, and so, Mr. Barker, I think the word lies now with you." Sherlock Holmes put the sopping bundle upon the table beside the lamp, and undid the cord which bound it. From within he extracted a dumbbell, which he tossed down to its fellow in the corner. Next he drew forth a pair of boots. "American, as you perceive," he remarked, pointing to the toes. Then he laid upon the table a long, deadly, sheathed knife. Finally he unravelled a bundle of clothing comprising a complete set of underclothes, socks, a grey tweed suit, and a short yellow overcoat. "The clothes are commonplace," remarked Holmes, "save only the overcoat, which is full of suggestive touches." He held it tenderly towards the light. "Here, as you perceive, is the inner pocket prolonged into the lining in such a fashion as to give ample space for the truncated fowling piece. The tailor's tab is on the back. Neil Outfitter, Vermissa, USA. I've spent an instructive afternoon in the rector's library, and have enlarged my knowledge by adding the fact that Vermissa is a flourishing little town at the head of one of the best-known coal and iron valleys in the United States. I have some recollection, Mr. Barker, that you associated the coal districts with Mr. Douglas's first wife, and it would surely not be too far-fetched an inference that the V.V. upon the card by the dead body might stand for Vermissa Valley, or that this very valley, which sends forth emissaries of murder, may be that valley of fear which we have heard. So much is fairly clear. And now, Mr. Barker, I seem to be standing rather in the way of your explanation." It was a sight to see Cecil Barker's expressive face during this exposition of the great detective. Anger, amazement, consternation, and indecision swept over it in turn. Finally he took refuge in a somewhat acrid irony. "You know such a lot, Mr. Holmes. Perhaps you had better tell us some more," he sneered. I have no doubt that I could tell you a great deal more, Mr. Barker, but it would come with a better grace from you." "Oh, you think so, do you? Well, all I can say is that if there's any secret here, it's not my secret, and I am not the man to give it away."
"Well, if you take that line, Mr. Barker," said the inspector quietly, "we must just keep you in sight until we have the warrant and can hold you."
"You can do what you damn please about that," said Barker defiantly. The proceedings seemed to have come to a definite end, so far as he was concerned, for one had only to look at that granite face to realize that no peine forte or dure would ever force him to plead against his will. The deadlock was broken, however, by a woman's voice. Mrs. Douglas had been standing listening at the half-open door, and now she entered the room. "You have done enough for now, Cecil," said she. "Whatever comes of it in the future, you have done enough."
"Enough and more than enough," remarked Sherlock Holmes gravely. "I have every sympathy with you, madam, and should strongly urge you to have some confidence in the common sense of our jurisdiction, and to take the police voluntarily into your complete confidence. It may be that I am myself at fault for not following up the hint which you conveyed to me through my friend Dr. Watson, but at that time I had every reason to believe that you were directly concerned in the crime. Now I am assured that this is not so. At the same time there is much that is unexplained, and I should strongly recommend that you ask Mr. Douglas to tell us his own story." Mrs. Douglas gave a cry of astonishment at Holmes's words. The detectives and I must have echoed it when we were aware of a man who seemed to have emerged from the wall, who advanced now from the gloom of the corner in which he had appeared. Mrs. Douglas turned, and in an instant her arms were round him. Barker had seized his outstretched hand.
"It's best this way, Jack," his wife repeated. "I'm sure that it is best."
"Indeed, yes, Mr. Douglas," said Sherlock Holmes. "I am sure that you will find it best." The man stood blinking at us with the dazed look of one who comes from the dark into the light. It was a remarkable face, bold grey eyes, a strong, short-clipped, grizzled moustache, a square projecting chin, and a humorous mouth. He took a good look at us all, and then, to my amazement, he advanced to me and handed me a bundle of paper. "I've heard of you," said he in a voice which was not quite English and not quite American, but was altogether mellow and pleasing. "You are the historian of this bunch. Well, Dr. Watson, you've never had such a story as that pass through your hands before, and I'll lay my last dollar on that. Tell it your own way, but there are the facts, and you can't miss the public so long as you have those. I've been cooped up 2 days, and I've spent the daylight hours, as much daylight as I could get in that rat trap, in putting the thing into words. You're welcome to them, you and your public. There's the story of the Valley of Fear." "That's the past, Mr. Douglas," said Sherlock Holmes quietly. "What we desire now is to hear your story of the present." "You'll have it, sir," said Douglas. "May I smoke as I talk?" "Well, thank you, Mr. Holmes. You're a smoker yourself, if I remember right, and you'll guess what it is to be sitting for 2 days with tobacco in your pocket and afraid that the smell will give you away." He leaned against the mantelpiece and sucked at the cigar which Holmes had handed him. "I've heard of you, Mr. Holmes. I never guessed that I would meet you. But before you're through with that," he nodded at my papers, "you will say I've brought you something fresh." Inspector MacDonald had been staring at the newcomer with the greatest amazement. "Well, this fairly beats me," he cried at last. "If you're Mr. John Douglas of Burlstone Manor, then whose death have we been investigating for these 2 days, and where in the world have you sprung from now? You seem to come out of the floor like a jack-in-a-box." "Ah, Mr. Mac," said Holmes, shaking a reproving forefinger, "you would not read that excellent local compilation which described the concealment of King Charles. People did not hide in those days without excellent hiding-places, and the hiding-place that had once been used may be used again. I had persuaded myself that we should find Mr. Douglas under this roof."
"And how long have you been playing this trick upon us, Mr. Holmes?" said the inspector angrily. "How long have you allowed us to waste ourselves upon a search that you knew to be an absurd one?" "Not one instant, my dear Mr. Mac. Only last night did I form my views of the case. As they could not be put to the proof until this evening, I invited you and your colleagues to take a holiday for the day. Pray, what more could I do? When I found the suit of clothes in the moat, it at once became apparent to me that the body we had found could not have been the body of Mr. John Douglas at all, but must be that of the bicyclist from Tunbridge Wells. No other conclusion was possible. Therefore I had to determine where Mr. John Douglas himself could be, and the balance of probability was that with the connivance of his wife and his friend he was concealed in a house which had such conveniences for a fugitive, and awaiting quieter times when he could make his final escape. "Well, you've figured it out about right," said Douglas approvingly. "I thought I'd dodge your British law, for I was not sure how I stood under it. And also I saw my chance to throw these hounds once for all off my track. Mind you, from first to last I've done nothing to be ashamed of, and nothing that I would not do again. But you'll judge that for yourselves when I tell you my story. Never mind warning me, Inspector. I'm ready to stand pat upon the truth. I'm not going to begin at the beginning, that's all there." He indicated my bundle of papers. "And a mighty queer yarn you'll find it. It all comes down to this, that there are some men that have good cause to hate me and would give their last dollar to know that they had got to me. So long as I'm alive and they are alive, there is no safety in this world for me. They hunted me from Chicago to California, then they chased me out of America. But when I married and settled down in this quiet spot, I thought my last years were going to be peaceable. I never explained to my wife how things were. Why should I pull her into it? She would never have a quiet moment again, but would always be imagining trouble. I fancy she knew something, for I may have dropped a word here or a word there. But until yesterday, after you gentlemen had seen her, she never knew the rights of the matter. She told you all she knew, and so did Barker here. For on the night when this thing happened, there was mighty little time for explanations. She knows everything now, and I would have been a wiser man if I had told her sooner. But it was a hard question, dear." He took her hand for an instant in his own, and I acted for the best. "Well, gentlemen, the day before these happenings I was over in Tunbridge Wells, and I got a glimpse of a man in the street. It was only a glimpse, but I have a quick eye for these things, and I never doubted who it was. It was the worst enemy I had among them all, one who has been after me like a hungry wolf after a caribou all these years. I knew there was trouble coming, and I came home and made ready for it. I guess I'd fight through it all right on my own. My luck was a proverb in the States about '76. I never doubted that it would be with me still. I was on my guard all that next day and never went out into the park. It's as well, or he'd have had the drop on me with that buckshot gun of his before ever I could draw on him. After the bridge was up, my mind was always more restful when that bridge was up in the evenings. I put the thing clear out of my head. I never dreamed of his getting into the house and waiting for me. But when I made my round in my dressing gown, as was my habit, I had no sooner entered the study than I scented danger. I guess when a man has had dangers in his life, and I've had more than most in my time, there is a kind of sixth sense that waves the red flag. I saw the signal clear enough, and yet I couldn't tell you why. Next instant I spotted a boot under the window curtain, and then I saw why plain enough. I'd just the one candle that was in my hand, but there was a good light from the hall lamp through the open door. I put down the candle and jumped for a hammer that I'd left on the mantel. At the same moment he sprang at me. I saw the glint of a knife, and I lashed at him with the hammer. I got him somewhere, for the knife tinkled down on the floor. He dodged around the table as quick as an eel, and a moment later he'd got his gun from under his coat. I heard him cock it, but I got hold of it before he could fire. I had it by the barrel, and we wrestled for it all ends up for a minute or more. It was death to the man that lost his grip. He never lost his grip, but he got it butt downward for a moment too long. Maybe it was I that pulled the trigger. Maybe we just jolted it off between us. Anyhow, he got both barrels in the face. And there I was, staring down at all that was left of Ted Baldwin. I'd recognized him in the township, and again when he sprang for me. But his own mother wouldn't recognize him as I saw him then. I'm used to rough work, but I fairly turned sick at the sight of him. I was hanging on the side of the table when Barker came hurrying down. I heard my wife coming, and I ran to the door and stopped her. It was no sight for a woman. I promised I'd come to her soon. I said a word or two to Barker. He took it all in at a glance, and we waited for the rest to come along. But there was no sign of them. Then we understood that they could hear nothing, and that all that had happened was known only to ourselves. It was at that instant that the idea came to me. I was fairly dazzled by the brilliance of it. The man's sleeve had slipped up, and there was the branded mark of the lodge upon his forearm. See here. The man whom we had known as Douglas turned up his own coat and cuff to show a brown triangle within a circle, exactly like that which we'd seen upon the dead man. It was the sight of that which started me on it. I seemed to see it all clear at a glance. There were his height and hair and figure about the same as my own. No one could swear to his face, poor devil. I brought down this suit of clothes, and in a quarter of an hour Barker and I had put my dressing gown on him, and he lay as you found him. We tied all things into a bundle, and I weighted them with the only weight I could find, and put them through the window. The card he'd meant to lay upon my body was lying beside his own. My rings were put on his finger, but when it came to the wedding ring, he held out his muscular hand. You can see for yourselves that I had struck the limit. I have not moved it since the day I was married, and it would have taken a file to get it off. I don't know, anyhow, that I should have cared to part with it, but if I'd wanted to, I couldn't. So we just had to leave that detail to take care of itself. On the other hand, I brought a bit of plaster down and put it where I'm wearing one myself at this instant. You slipped up there, Mr. Holmes, clever as you are, for if you had chanced to take off that plaster, you'd have found no cut underneath it. Well, that was the situation. If I could lie low for a while and then get away, where I could be joined by my widow, we should have a chance at last of living in peace for the rest of our lives. These devils would give me no rest so long as I was above ground, but if they saw in the papers that Baldwin had got his man, there would be an end of all my troubles. I hadn't much time to make it all clear to Barker and to my wife, but they understood enough to be able to help me. I knew all about this hiding place, so did Ames, but it never entered his head to connect it with the matter. I retired into it, and it was up to Barker to do the rest. I guess you can fill in for yourselves what he did. He opened the window and made the mark on the sill, to give an idea of how the murderer escaped. It was a tall order, that, but as the bridge was up there was no other way. Then, when everything was fixed, he rang the bell for all he was worth. What happened afterward you know. And so, gentlemen, you can do what you please, but I've told you the truth and the whole truth, so help me God. What I ask you now is, how do I stand by the English law? There was a silence which was broken by Sherlock Holmes. The English law is in the main a just law. You'll get no worse than your deserts from that, Mr. Douglas. But I would ask you, how did this man know that you lived here, or how to get into your house, or where to hide to get you? I know nothing of this. Holmes's face was very white and grave. The story is not over yet, I fear, said he. You may find worse dangers than the English law, or even than your enemies from America. I see trouble before you, Mr. Douglas. You'll take my advice and still be on your guard. And now, my long-suffering readers, I'll ask you to come away with me for a time, far from the Sussex manor house of Burleston, and far also from the year of grace in which we made our eventful journey, which ended with the strange story of the man who had been known as John Douglas. I wish you to journey back some 20 years in time, and westward some thousands of miles in space, that I may lay before you a singular and terrible narrative, so singular and so terrible that you may find it hard to believe that even as I tell it, even so did it occur. Do not think that I intrude one story before another is finished. As you read on you will find that this is not so, and when I have detailed those distant events, and you have solved this mystery of the past, we shall meet once more in those rooms on Baker Street, where this, like so many other wonderful happenings, will find its end. End of Chapter 7 and Part 1 of The Valley of Fear. Part 2, Chapter 1 of The Valley of Fear by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2, The Scourers. Chapter 1, The Man. It was the 4th of February in the year 1875. It had been a severe winter, and the snow lay deep in the gorges of the Gilmerton Mountains. The steam ploughs had, however, kept the railroad open, and the evening train, which connects the long line of coal-mining and iron-working settlements, was slowly groaning its way up the steep gradients which led from Stagville on the plain to Vermissa, the central township which lies at the head of Vermissa Valley. From this point the track sweeps downward to Barton's Crossing, Helmdale, and the purely agricultural county of Merton. It was a single-track railroad, but at every siding, and they were numerous, long lines of trucks piled with coal and iron ore told of the hidden wealth which had brought a rude population and a bustling life to this most desolate corner of the United States of America. For desolate it was. Little could the first pioneer who had traversed it have ever imagined that the fairest prairies and the most lush water pastures were valueless compared to this gloomy land of black crag and tangled forest. Above the dark and often scarcely penetrable woods upon their flanks, the high, bare crowns of the mountains, white snow and jagged rock, towered upon each flank, leaving a long, winding, tortuous valley in the centre. Up this the little train was slowly crawling. The oil lamps had just been lit in the leading passenger car, a long, bare carriage, in which some 20 or 30 people were seated. The greater number of these were workmen returning from their day's toil in the lower part of the valley. At least a dozen, by their grimed faces and the safety lanterns which they carried, proclaimed themselves miners. These sat smoking in a group and conversed in low voices, glancing occasionally at 2 men on the opposite side of the car, whose uniforms and badges showed them to be policemen. Several women of the labouring class and 1 or 2 travellers who might have been small local storekeepers made up the rest of the company, with the exception of 1 young man in a corner by himself. It is with this man that we are concerned. Take a good look at him, for he is worth it. He is a fresh-complexioned, middle-sized young man, not far, one would guess, from his 30th year. He has large, shrewd, humorous grey eyes, which twinkle inquiringly from time to time as he looks round through his spectacles at the people about him. It is easy to see that he is of a sociable and possibly simple disposition, anxious to be friendly to all men. Anyone could pick him at once as gregarious in his habits and communicative in his nature, with a quick wit and a ready smile. And yet the man who studied him more closely might discern a certain firmness of jaw and grim tightness about the lips which would warn him that there were depths beyond, and that this pleasant, brown-haired young Irishman might conceivably leave his mark for good or evil upon any society to which he was introduced. Having made 1 or 2 tentative remarks to the nearest miner, and receiving only short, gruff replies, the traveller resigned himself to uncongenial silence, staring moodily out of the window at the fading landscape. It was not a cheering prospect. Through the growing gloom there pulsed the red glow of the furnaces on the sides of the hills. Great heaps of slag and dumps of cinders loomed up on each side, with the high shafts of the collieries towering above them. Huddled groups of mean wooden houses, the windows of which were beginning to outline themselves in light, were scattered here and there along the line, and the frequent halting places were crowded with their swarthy inhabitants. The iron and coal valleys of the Vermissa district were no resorts for the leisured or the cultured. Everywhere there were stern signs of the crudest battle of life, the rude work to be done, and the rude, strong workers who did it. The young traveller gazed out into this dismal country with a face of mingled repulsion and interest, which showed that the scene was new to him. At intervals he drew from his pocket a bulky letter to which he referred, and on the margins of which he scribbled some notes. Once, from the back of his waist, he produced something which one would hardly have expected to find in the possession of so mild-mannered a man. It was a navy revolver of the largest size. As he turned it slantwise to the light, the glint upon the rims of the copper shells within the drum showed that it was fully loaded. He quickly restored it to his secret pocket, but not before it had been observed by a working man who had seated himself upon the adjoining bench. "Hello, mate," said he. "You seem heeled and ready." The young man smiled with an air of embarrassment. "Yes," said he, "we need them sometimes in the place I come from." "And where may that be?" "I'm last from Chicago." "A stranger in these parts?" "Yes." "You may find you need it here," said the workman. "Ah, is that so?" The young man seemed interested. "Have you heard nothing of doings hereabouts?" "Nothing out of the way." "Why, I thought the country was full of it. You'll hear quick enough. What made you come here?" "I heard there was always work for a willing man." "Are you a member of the union?" "Sure." "Then you'll get your job, I guess. Have you any friends?" "Not yet, but I have the means of making them." "How's that, then?" "I am one of the eminent order of freemen. There's no town without a lodge, and where there's a lodge I'll find my friends." The remark had a singular effect upon his companion. He glanced around suspiciously at the others in the car. The miners were still whispering among themselves. The two police officers were dozing. He came across, seated himself close to the young traveller, and held out his hand. "Put it there," he said. A hand grip passed between the two. "I see you speak the truth," said the workman, "but it's well to make certain." He raised his right hand to his right eyebrow. The traveller at once raised his left hand to his left eyebrow. "Dark nights are unpleasant," said the workman. "Yes, for strangers to travel," the other answered. "That's good enough. I'm Brother Scanlon, Lodge 341, Vermissa Valley. Glad to see you in these parts." "Thank you. I'm Brother John McMurdo, Lodge 29, Chicago. Bodymaster J. H. Scott, but I'm in luck to meet a brother so early." "Well, there are plenty of us about. You won't find the order more flourishing anywhere in the States than right here in Vermissa Valley. But we could do with some lads like you. I can't understand a spry man of the Union finding no work to do in Chicago." "I found plenty of work to do," said McMurdo. "Then why did you leave?" McMurdo nodded toward the policeman and smiled. "I guess those chaps will be glad to know," he said. Scanlon groaned sympathetically. "In trouble?" he asked in a whisper. "Deep." "A penitentiary job?" "And the rest." "Not a killing?" "It's early days to talk of such things," said McMurdo with the air of a man who had been surprised into saying more than he intended. "I've my own good reasons for leaving Chicago, and let that be enough for you. Who are you, that you should take it on yourself to ask such things?" His grey eyes gleamed with sudden and dangerous anger from behind his glasses. "All right, mate, no offence meant. The boys will think none the worse of you, whatever you may have done. Where are you bound for now?" McMurdo took out an envelope and held it close to the murky oil lamp. "Here is the address. Jacob Shafter, Sheridan Street. It's a boarding house that was recommended by a man I know in Chicago." "Well, I don't know it, but Vermissa is out of my beat. I live at Hobson's Patch, and that's here we're drawing up to now. But say, there's one bit of advice I'll give you before we part. If you're in trouble in Vermissa, go straight to the Union House and see Boss McGinty. He's the bodymaster of Vermissa Lodge, and nothing can happen in these parts unless Black Jack McGinty wants it. So long, mate. Maybe we'll meet in Lodge one of these evenings, but mind my words, if you're in trouble, go to Boss McGinty." Scanlon descended, and McMurdo was left once again to his thoughts. Night had now fallen, and the flames of the frequent furnaces were roaring and leaping in the darkness. Against their lurid background, dark figures were bending and straining, twisting and turning with the motion of winch or of windlass, to the rhythm of an eternal clank and roar. "I guess hell must look something like that," said a voice. McMurdo turned and saw that one of the policemen had shifted in his seat and was staring out into the fiery waste. "For that matter," said the other policeman, "I allow that hell must be something like that. If there are worse devils down yonder than some we could name, it's more than I'd expect. I guess you're new to this part, young man." "Well, what if I am?" McMurdo answered in a surly voice. "Just this, mister, that I should advise you to be careful in choosing your friends. I don't think I'd begin with Mike Scanlon or his gang if I were you." "What the hell is it to you? Who are my friends?" roared McMurdo in a voice which brought every head in the carriage round to witness the altercation. "Did I ask you for your advice? Or did you think me such a sucker that I couldn't move without it? You speak when you're spoken to, and by the Lord you'd have to wait a long time if it was me." He thrust out his face and grinned at the patrolman like a snarling dog. The two policemen, heavy, good-natured men, were taken aback by the extraordinary vehemence with which their friendly advances had been rejected. "No offence, stranger," said one. "It was a warning for your own good, seeing that you are, by your own showing, new to the place." "I'm new to the place, but I'm not new to you and your kind," cried McMurdo in cold fury. "I guess you're the same in all places, shoving your advice in when nobody asks for it." "Maybe we'll see more of you before long," said one of the patrolmen with a grin. "You're a real hand-picked one, if I'm a judge." "I was thinking the same," remarked the other. "I guess we may meet again." "I'm not afraid of you, and don't you think it," cried McMurdo. "My name's Jack McMurdo, see? If you want me, you'll find me at Jacob Shafter's on Sheridan Street, Vermissa. So I'm not hiding from you, am I? Day or night, I dare to look the like of you in the face. Don't make any mistake about that." There was a murmur of sympathy and admiration from the miners at the dauntless demeanour of the newcomer, while the two policemen shrugged their shoulders and renewed a conversation between themselves. A few minutes later, the train ran into the ill-lit station, and there was a general clearing, for Vermissa was by far the largest town on the line. McMurdo picked up his leather gripsack and was about to start off into the darkness when one of the miners accosted him. "By gar, mate, you know how to speak to the cops," he said in a voice of awe. "It was grand to hear you. Let me carry your grip and show you the road. I'm passing Shafters on the way to my own shack." There was a chorus of friendly good nights from the other miners as they passed from the platform. Before ever he had set foot on it, McMurdo the turbulent had become a character in Vermissa. The country had been a place of terror, but the town was in its way even more depressing. Down that long valley there was at least a certain gloomy grandeur in the huge fires and the clouds of drifting smoke, while the strength and industry of man found fitting monuments in the hills which he had spilled by the side of his monstrous excavations. But the town showed a dead level of mean ugliness and squalor. The broad street was churned up by the traffic into a horrible rutted paste of muddy snow. The sidewalks were narrow and uneven. The numerous gas lamps served only to show more clearly a long line of wooden houses, each with its veranda facing the street, unkempt and dirty. As they approached the centre of the town, the scene was brightened by a row of well-lit stores, and even more by a cluster of saloons and gaming houses, in which the miners spent their hard-earned but generous wages. "That's the Union House," said the guide, pointing to one saloon which rose almost to the dignity of being a hotel. "Jack McGinty is the boss there." "What sort of man is he?" McMurdo asked. "What? Have you never heard of the boss?" "How could I have heard of him, when you know that I'm a stranger in these parts?" "Well, I thought his name was known clear across the country. It's been in the papers often enough." "What for?" "Well," the miner lowered his voice, "over the affairs." "What affairs?" "Good Lord, mister, you are queer. If I must say it without offence, there's only one set of affairs that you'll hear of in these parts, and that's the affairs of the Scourers." "Why, I seem to have read of the Scourers in Chicago. A gang of murderers, are they not?" "Hush, on your life!" cried the miner, standing still in alarm and gazing in amazement at his companion. "Man, you won't live long in these parts if you speak in the open street like that. Many a man has had the life beaten out of him for less." "Well, I know nothing about them. It's only what I've read." "And I'm not saying that you've not read the truth." The man looked nervously round him as he spoke, peering into the shadows as if he feared to see some lurking danger. "If killing is murder, then God knows there's a murder and to spare. But don't you dare to breathe the name of Jack McGinty in connection with it, stranger, for every whisper goes back to him, and he's not one that is likely to let it pass. Now, that's the house you're after, that one, standing back from the street. You'll find old Jacob Shafter that runs it as honest a man as lives in this township." "I thank you," said McMurdo, and shaking hands with his new acquaintance, he plodded, gripsack in hand, up the path which led to the dwelling-house, at the door of which he gave a resounding knock. It was opened at once by someone very different from what he had expected. It was a woman, young and singularly beautiful. She was of the German type, blonde and fair-haired, with the piquant contrast of a pair of beautiful dark eyes, with which she surveyed the stranger with surprise and a pleasing embarrassment which brought a wave of colour over her pale face. Framed in the bright light of the open doorway, it seemed to McMurdo that he had never seen a more beautiful picture, the more attractive for its contrast with the sordid and gloomy surroundings. A lovely violet growing upon one of those black slag heaps of the mines would not have seemed more surprising. So entranced was he that he stood staring without a word, and it was she who broke the silence. "I thought it was father," said she, with a pleasing little touch of a German accent. "Did you come to see him? He's downtown. I expect him back every minute." McMurdo continued to gaze at her in open admiration until her eyes dropped in confusion before this masterful visitor. "No, miss," he said at last. "I'm in no hurry to see him. But your house was recommended to me for board. I thought it might suit me, and now I know it will." "You are quick to make up your mind," said she with a smile. "Anyone but a blind man could do as much," the other answered. She laughed at the compliment. "Come right in, sir," she said. "I'm Miss Ethel Shafter, Mr. Shafter's daughter. My mother's dead, and I run the house. You can sit down by the stove in the front room until father comes along. Ah, here he is, so you can fix things with him right away." A heavy, elderly man came plodding up the path. In a few words, McMurdo explained his business. A man of the name of Murphy had given him the address in Chicago. He, in turn, had had it from someone else. Old Shafter was quite ready. The stranger made no bones about terms, agreed at once to every condition, and was apparently fairly flush of money. For $7 a week paid in advance, he was to have board and lodging. So it was that McMurdo, the self-confessed fugitive from justice, took up his abode under the roof of the Shafters, the first step which was to lead to so long and dark a train of events, ending in a far distant land. End of Part 2, Chapter 1. Part 2, Chapter 2 of The Valley of Fear by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2. The Bodymaster. McMurdo was a man who made his mark quickly. Wherever he was, the folk around soon knew it. Within a week he had become infinitely the most important person at Shafters. There were 10 or a dozen boarders there, but they were honest foremen or commonplace clerks from the stores, of a very different calibre from the young Irishman. Of an evening, when they gathered together, his joke was always the readiest, his conversation the brightest, and his song the best. He was a born boon companion, with a magnetism which drew good humour from all around him. And yet he showed again and again, as he had shown in the railway carriage, a capacity for sudden, fierce anger, which compelled the respect and even the fear of those who met him. For the law, too, and all who were connected with it, he exhibited a bitter contempt which delighted some and alarmed others of his fellow boarders. From the first he made it evident, by his open admiration, that the daughter of the house had won his heart from the instant that he had set eyes upon her beauty and her grace. He was no backward suitor. On the second day he told her that he loved her, and from then onward he repeated the same story, with an absolute disregard of what she might say to discourage him. "Someone else," he would cry. "Well, the worse luck for someone else. Let him look out for himself. Am I to lose my life's chance and all my heart's desire for someone else? You can keep on saying no, Etty. The day will come when you'll say yes, and I'm young enough to wait." He was a dangerous suitor, with his glib Irish tongue and his pretty coaxing ways. There was about him also that glamour of experience and of mystery which attracts a woman's interest, and finally her love. He could talk of the sweet valleys of County Monaghan, from which he came, of the lovely distant island, the low hills and green meadows of which seemed the more beautiful when imagination viewed them from this place of grime and snow. Then he was versed in the life of the cities of the north, of Detroit, and of the lumber camps of Michigan, and finally of Chicago, where he had worked in a planing mill. And afterwards came the hint of romance, the feeling that strange things had happened to him in that great city, so strange and so intimate that they might not be spoken of. He spoke wistfully of a sudden leaving, a breaking of old ties, a flight into a strange world, ending in this dreary valley, and Etty listened, her dark eyes gleaming with pity and with sympathy, those two qualities which may turn so rapidly and so naturally to love. McMurdo had obtained a temporary job as bookkeeper, for he was a well-educated man. This kept him out most of the day, and he had not found occasion yet to report himself to the head of the lodge of the Eminent Order of Freemen. He was reminded of his omission, however, by a visit one evening from Mike Scanlon, the fellow member whom he had met in the train. Scanlon, the small, sharp-faced, nervous, black-eyed man, seemed glad to see him once more. After a glass or two of whisky, he broached the subject of his visit. "Say, McMurdo," said he, "I remembered your address, so I made bold to call. I'm surprised that you've not reported to the Bodymaster. Why haven't you seen Boss McGinty yet?" "Well, I had to find a job. I've been busy." "You must find time for him, if you've none for anything else. Good Lord, man, you're a fool not to have been down to the Union House and registered your name the first morning after you came here. If you run against him, well, you mustn't, that's all." McMurdo showed mild surprise. "I've been a member of the lodge for over 2 years, Scanlon, but I've never heard that duties were so pressing as all that." Maybe not in Chicago."
"Well, it's the same society here."
"Is it?"
Scanlon looked at him long and fixedly. There was something sinister in his eyes. "Isn't it?"
"You'll tell me that in a month's time. I hear you had a talk with the patrolman after I left the train."
"How did you know that?"
"Oh, it got about. Things do get about for good and for bad in this district."
"Well, yes, I told the hounds what I thought of them."
"By the Lord, you'll be a man after McGinty's heart."
"What, does he hate the police too?"
Scanlon burst out laughing. "You go and see him, my lad," said he as he took his leave. "It's not the police, but you that he'll hate if you don't. Now, take a friend's advice, and go at once."
It chanced that on the same evening McMurdo had another more pressing interview which urged him in the same direction. It may have been that his attentions to Etty had been more evident than before, or that they had gradually obtruded themselves into the slow mind of his good German host. But, whatever the cause, the boarding-house keeper beckoned the young man into his private room and started on the subject without any circumlocution.
"It seems to me, mister," said he, "that you are getting set on my Etty. Ain't that so, or am I wrong?"
"Yes, that is so," the young man answered.
"Well, I want to tell you right now that it ain't no manner of use. There's someone slipped in afore you."
"She told me so."
"Well, you can lay that she told you truth. But did she tell you who it was?"
"No, I asked her, but she wouldn't tell."
"I dare say not. The little baggage. Perhaps she did not wish to frighten you away."
"Frighten?"
McMurdo was on fire in a moment. "Ah, yes, my friend. You need not be ashamed to be frightened of him. It is Teddy Baldwin."
"And who the devil is he?"
"He is the boss of Scourers."
"Scourers? I've heard of them before. It's Scourers here and Scourers there, and always in a whisper. What are you all afraid of? Who are the Scourers?" The boarding-house keeper instinctively sank his voice, as everyone did who talked about that terrible society.
"The Scourers," said he, "are the eminent order of freemen."
The young man stared. "Why, I'm a member of that order myself."
"You? I would never have had you in my house if I'd known it. Not if you were to pay me $100 a week."
"What's wrong with the order? It's for charity and good fellowship. The rules say so."
"Maybe in some places. Not here."
"What is it here?"
"It's a murder society. That's what it is."
McMurdo laughed incredulously. "How can you prove that?" he asked.
"Prove it? Are there not 50 murders to prove it? What about Millman and von Schorst and the Nicholson family and old Mr. Hyam and little Billy James and the others? Prove it? Is there a man or a woman in this valley that does not know it?"
"See here," said McMurdo earnestly, "I want you to take back what you said, or else make it good. One or the other you must do before I quit this room. Put yourself in my place. Here I am, a stranger in the town. I belong to a society that I know only as an innocent one. You'll find it through the length and breadth of the States, but always as an innocent one. Now, when I'm counting upon joining it here, you tell me that it's the same as a murder society called the Scourers. I guess you owe me either an apology or else an explanation, Mr. Shafter."
"I can but tell you what the whole world knows, mister. The bosses of the one are the bosses of the other. If you offend the one, it is the other that will strike you. We have proved it too often."
"That's just gossip. I want proof," said McMurdo.
"If you live here long, you will get your proof. But I forget that you are yourself one of them. You will soon be as bad as the rest. But you will find other lodgings, mister. I cannot have you here. Is it not bad enough that one of these people come courting my Etty, and that I dare not turn him down, and that I should have another for my boarder? Yes, indeed, you shall not sleep here after tonight." McMurdo found himself under sentence of banishment, both from his comfortable quarters and from the girl whom he loved. He found her alone in the sitting-room that same evening, and he poured his troubles into her ear. "Sure your father is after giving me notice," he said. "It's little I would care if it was just my room, but indeed, Etty, though it's only a week that I've known you, you're the very breath of life to me, and I can't live without you." "Oh, hush, Mr. McMurdo, don't speak so," said the girl. "I've told you, have I not, that you're too late. There's another, and if I have not promised to marry him at once, at least I can promise no one else." "Suppose I had been first, Etty? Would have had a chance." The girl sank her face into her hands. "I wish to heaven that you had been first," she sobbed. McMurdo was down on his knees before her in an instant. "For God's sake, Etty, let it stand at that," he cried. "Will you ruin your life and my own for the sake of this promise? Follow your heart, acushla. 'Tis a safer guide than any promise before you knew what it was that you were saying." He had seized Etty's white hand between his own strong brown ones. "Say that you'll be mine, and we'll face it out together." "Not here." "Yes, here." "No, no, Jack." His arms were round her now. "It could not be here. Could you take me away?" A struggle passed for a moment over McMurdo's face, but it ended by setting like granite. "No, here," he said. "I'll hold you against the world, Etty, right here where we are." "Why should we not leave together?" "No, Etty, I can't leave here." "But why?" "I'd never hold my head up again if I felt that I'd been driven out. Besides, what is there to be afraid of? Are we not free folks in a free country? If you love me, and I you, who will dare to come between us?" "You don't know, Jack. You've been here too short a time. You don't know this Baldwin. You don't know how McGinty and his Cowrers—" "No, I don't know them, and I don't fear them, and I don't believe in them," said McMurdo. "I've lived among rough men, my darling, and instead of fearing them, it has always ended that they feared me. Always, Etty. It's mad on the face of it. If these men, as your father says, have done crime after crime in the valley, and if everyone knows them by name, how come is that none are brought to justice? You answer me that, Etty." "Because no witness dares to appear against them. He would not live a month if he did. Also because they have always their own men to swear that the accused one was far from the scene of the crime. But surely, Jack, you must have read all this. I had understood that every paper in the United States was writing about it." "Well, I've read something, it is true, but I thought it was a story. Maybe these men have some reason in what they do. Maybe they're wronged and have no other way to help themselves." "Oh, Jack, don't let me hear you speak or so. That is how he speaks, the other one." "Baldwin? He speaks like that, does he?"
"And that is why I loathe him so. Oh, Jack, how can I tell you the truth? I loathe him with all my heart, but I fear him also. I fear him for myself, but above all I fear him for my father. I know that some great sorrow would come upon us if I dared to say what I really felt. That is why I have put him off with half-promises. It was in real truth our only hope. But if you would fly with me, Jack, we could take father with us and live forever far from the power of these wicked men."
Again there was the struggle upon McMurdo's face, and again it set like granite. "No harm shall come to you, Etty, nor to your father either. As to wicked men, I expect you may find that I'm as bad as the worst of them before you're through."
"No, no, Jack, I would trust you anywhere."
McMurdo laughed bitterly. "Good Lord, how little you know of me! Your innocent soul, my darling, could not even guess what is passing in mine. But hello, who's the visitor?" The door had opened suddenly, and a young fellow came swaggering in with the air of one who is the master. He was a handsome, dashing young man of about the same age and build as McMurdo himself. Under his broad-brimmed black felt hat which he had not troubled to remove. A handsome face with fierce, domineering eyes and a curved hawk-bill of a nose looked savagely at the pair who sat by the stove. Etty had jumped to her feet, full of confusion and alarm.
"I'm glad to see you, Mr. Baldwin," said she. "You're earlier than I thought. Come and sit down."
Baldwin stood with his hands on his hips, looking at McMurdo. "Who is this?" he asked curtly.
"It's a friend of mine, Mr. Baldwin. A new boarder here, Mr. McMurdo. May I introduce you to Mr. Baldwin?"
The young men nodded in surly fashion to each other. "Maybe Miss Etty has told you how it is with us," said Baldwin.
"I don't understand that there was any relation between you."
"Didn't you? Well, you can understand it now. You can take it from me that this young lady is mine, and you'll find it a very fine evening for a walk."
"Thank you. I'm in no humour for a walk."
"Aren't you?" The man's savage eyes were blazing with anger. "Maybe you're in a humour for a fight, Mr. Boarder."
"That I am!" cried McMurdo, springing to his feet. "You never said a more welcome word." "For God's sake, Jack! Oh, for God's sake, Jack!" cried poor distracted Etty. "Oh, Jack, Jack, he'll hurt you."
"Oh, it's Jack, is it?" said Baldwin with an oath. "You've come to that already, have you?"
"Oh, Ted, be reasonable, be kind. For my sake, Ted. If ever you loved me, be big-hearted and forgiving."
"I think, Etty, that if you were to leave us alone, we could get this thing settled," said McMurdo quietly.
"Or maybe, Mr. Baldwin, you'll take a turn down the street with me. It's a fine evening, and there's some open ground beyond the next block."
"I'll get even with you without needing to dirty my hands," said his enemy. "You'll wish you'd never set foot in this house before I'm through with you."
"No time like the present," cried McMurdo.
"I'll choose my own time, mister. You can leave the time to me. See here." He suddenly rolled up his sleeve and showed upon his forearm a peculiar sign which appeared to have been branded there. It was a circle with a triangle within it. "Do you know what that means?"
"I neither know nor care."
"Well, you will know. I'll promise you that. You won't be much older, either. Perhaps Miss Etty can tell you something about it. As to you, Etty, you'll come back to me on your knees, do you hear, girl? On your knees, and then I'll tell you what your punishment may be. You've sowed, and by the Lord I'll see that you reap." He glanced at them both in fury. Then he turned upon his heel, and an instant later the outer door had banged behind him. For a few moments McMurdo and the girl stood in silence. Then she threw her arms around him.
"Oh, Jack, how brave you were! But it is no use. You must fly. Tonight, Jack, tonight. It's your only hope. You will have your life. I read it in his horrible eyes. What chance have you against a dozen of them, with Boss McGinty and all the power of the lodge behind them?"
McMurdo disengaged her hands, kissed her, and gently pushed her back into a chair.
"There, acushla, there. Don't be disturbed or fear for me. I'm a free man myself. I'm after telling your father about it. Maybe I am no better than the others, so don't make a saint of me. Perhaps you hate me too now that I've told you so much." "Hate you, Jack? While life lasts I could never do that. I've heard that there is no harm in being a freeman anywhere but here, so why should I think the worse of you for that? But if you are a freeman, Jack, why would you not go down and make a friend of Boss McGinty? Oh, hurry, Jack, hurry. Get your word in first, or the hounds will be on your trail."
"I was thinking the same thing," said McMurdo. "I'll go right now and fix it. You can tell your father that I'll sleep here tonight and find some other quarters in the morning." The bar of McGinty's saloon was crowded as usual, for it was the favourite loafing place of all the rougher elements of the town. The man was popular, for he had a rough, jovial disposition which formed a mask, covering a great deal which lay behind it. But apart from this popularity, the fear in which he was held throughout the township, and indeed down the whole 30 miles of the valley and past the mountains on each side of it, was enough in itself to fill his bar, for none could afford to neglect his goodwill. Besides those secret powers which it was universally believed that he exercised in so pitiless a fashion, he was a high public official, a municipal councillor, and a commissioner of roads, elected to the office through the votes of the ruffians who in turn expected to receive favours at his hands. Assessments and taxes were enormous. The public works were notoriously neglected. The accounts were slurred over by bribed auditors, and the decent citizen was terrorized into paying public blackmail, and holding his tongue lest some worse thing befall him. Thus it was that, year by year, Boss McGinty's diamond pins became more obtrusive, his gold chains more weighty across a more gorgeous vest, and his saloon stretched farther and farther, until it threatened to absorb one whole side of the market square. McMurdo pushed open the swinging door of the saloon, and made his way amid the crowd of men within, through an atmosphere blurred with tobacco smoke and heavy with the smell of spirits. The place was brilliantly lighted, and the huge heavily gilt mirrors upon every wall reflected and multiplied the garish illumination. There were several bartenders in their shirt-sleeves, hard at work mixing drinks for the loungers who fringed the broad brass-trimmed counter. At the far end, with his body resting upon the bar, and a cigar stuck at an acute angle from the corner of his mouth, stood a tall, strong, heavily built man who could be none other than the famous McGinty himself. He was a black-maned giant, bearded to the cheekbones, and with a shock of raven hair which fell to his collar. His complexion was as swarthy as that of an Italian, and his eyes were of a strange dead black, which, combined with a slight squint, gave them a particularly sinister appearance. All else in the man, his noble proportions, his fine features, and his frank bearing, fitted in with that jovial, man-to-man manner which he affected. Here, one would say, is a bluff, honest fellow, whose heart would be sound, however rude his outspoken words might seem. It was only when those dead, dark eyes, deep and remorseless, were turned upon a man that he shrank within himself, feeling that he was face to face with an infinite possibility of latent evil, with a strength and courage and cunning behind it which made it 1,000 times more deadly. Having had a good look at this man, McMurdo elbowed his way forward with his usual careless audacity, and pushed himself through the little group of courtiers who were fawning upon the powerful boss, laughing uproariously at the smallest of his jokes. The young stranger's bold grey eyes looked back fearlessly through their glasses at the deadly black ones which turned sharply upon him. "Well, young man, I can't call your face to mind."
"I'm new here, Mr. McGinty."
"You are not so new that you can't give a gentleman his proper title." "He's Councillor McGinty, young man," said a voice from the group.
"I'm sorry, Councillor. I'm strange to the ways of the place, but I was advised to see you."
"Well, you see me. This is all there is. What do you think of me?"
"Well, it's early days. If your heart is as big as your body, and your soul as fine as your face, then I'd ask for nothing better," said McMurdo.
"By gar, you've got an Irish tongue in your head anyhow," cried the saloon-keeper, not quite certain whether to humour this audacious visitor or to stand upon his dignity. "So you are good enough to pass my appearance?"
"Sure," said McMurdo.
"And you were told to see me?"
"I was."
"And who told you?"
"Brother Scanlon, of Lodge 341, Vermissa. I drink your health, Councillor, and to our better acquaintance." He raised a glass with which he had been served to his lips, and elevated his little finger as he drank it. McGinty, who had been watching him narrowly, raised his thick black eyebrows. "Oh, it's like that, is it?" said he.
I'll have to look a bit closer into this, Mr.
McMurdo.
A bit closer, Mr. McMurdo, for we don't take folk on trust in these parts, nor believe all we're told neither. Come in here for a moment, behind the bar."
There was a small room there, lined with barrels. McGinty carefully closed the door, and then seated himself on one of them, biting thoughtfully on his cigar and surveying his companion with those disquieting eyes. For a couple of minutes he sat in complete silence. McMurdo bore the inspection cheerfully, one hand in his coat pocket, the other twisting his brown moustache. Suddenly McGinty stooped and produced a wicked-looking revolver.
"See here, my joker," said he, "if I thought you were playing any game on us, it would be short work for you."
"This is a strange welcome," McMurdo answered with some dignity, "for the bodymaster of a lodge of freemen to give to a stranger brother."
"Aye, but it's just the same that you've to prove," said McGinty, "and God help you if you fail. Where were you made?"
"Lodge 29, Chicago."
"When?"
"June 24th, 1872.
"What bodymaster?"
"James H. Scott."
"Who is your district ruler?"
"Bartholomew Wilson."
You seem glib enough in your tests. What are you doing here?"
"Working, the same as you, but a poorer job."
"You have your back answer quick enough?"
"Yes, I was always quick of speech."
"Are you quick of action?"
"I have had that name among those that knew me best."
"Well, we may try you sooner than you think. Have you heard anything of the lodge in these parts?"
"I have heard that it takes a man to be a brother."
"True for you, Mr. McMurdo. Why did you leave Chicago?"
"I'm damned if I'll tell you that." McGinty opened his eyes. He was not used to being answered in such fashion, and it amused him.
"Why won't you tell me?"
"Because no brother may tell another a lie."
"Then the truth is too bad to tell?"
"You can put it that way if you like."
"See here, mister. You can't expect me as bodymaster to pass into the lodge a man for whose past he can't answer."
McMurdo looked puzzled. Then he took a worn newspaper cutting from an inner pocket. "You wouldn't squeal on a fellow," said he.
"I'll wipe my hand across your face if you say such words to me," cried McGinty hotly.
"You're right, counsellor," said McMurdo meekly. "I should apologize. I spoke without thought. Well, I know that I'm safe in your hands. Look at that clipping." McGinty glanced his eyes over the account of the shooting of one Jonas Pinto in the Lake Saloon, Market Street, Chicago, in the New Year week of 1874.
"Your work?"
he asked as he handed back the paper. McMurdo nodded.
"Why did you shoot him?"
"I was helping Uncle Sam to make dollars. Maybe mine were not as good gold as his, but they looked as well and were cheaper to make. This man Pinto helped me to shove the queer—"
"To do what?"
"Well, it means to pass the dollars out into circulation. Then he said he would split. Maybe he did split. I didn't wait to see. I just killed him and lighted out for the coal country."
"Why the coal country?"
"'Cause I'd read in the papers that they weren't too particular in those parts."
McGinty laughed. "Ha! You were first a coiner and then a murderer, and you came to these parts because you thought you'd be welcome."
"That's about the size of it," McMurdo answered.
"Well, I guess you'll go far. Say, can you make those dollars yet?"
McMurdo took half a dozen from his pocket. "Those never passed the Philadelphia Mint," said he.
"You don't say."
McGinty held them to the light in his enormous hand, which was hairy as a gorilla's.
"I can see no difference. Gah, you'll be a mighty useful brother. I'm thinking we can do with a bad man or two among us, friend McMurdo, for there are times when we have to take our own part. We'd soon be against the wall if we didn't shove back at those that were pushing us."
Well, I guess I'll do my share of shoving with the rest of the boys."
"You seem to have a good nerve. You didn't squirm when I shoved this gun at you."
"It was not me that was in danger."
"Who then?"
"It was you, Councillor."
McMurdo drew a cocked pistol from the side pocket of his pea-jacket.
"I was covering you all the time. I guess my shot would have been as quick as yours."
"By gar!"
McGinty flushed an angry red and then burst into a roar of laughter.
"Ha, ha, ha! Say we've had no such holy terror come to hand this many a year. I reckon the lodge will learn to be proud of you. Well, what the hell do you want? And can't I speak alone with a gentleman for 5 minutes, but you must butt in on us?"
The bartender stood abashed.
"I'm sorry, Councillor, but it's Ted Baldwin. He says he must see you this very minute."
The message was unnecessary, for the set, cruel face of the man himself was looking over the servant's shoulder. He pushed the bartender out and closed the door on him. "So," said he with a furious glance at McMurdo, "you got here first, did you? I've a word to say to you, Councillor, about this man."
"Then say it here and now before my face,"
cried McMurdo. "I'll say it at my own time, in my own way."
"Tut, tut,"
said McGinty, getting off his barrel.
"This will never do. We have a new brother here, Baldwin, and it's not for us to greet him in such fashion. Hold out your hand, man, and make it up."
"Never!" cried Baldwin in a fury. "I've offered to fight him if he thinks I've wronged him," said McMurdo. "I'll fight him with fists, or if that won't satisfy him, I'll fight him any other way he chooses. Now I'll leave it to you, Councillor, to judge between us, as a bodymaster should."
"What is it, then?"
"A young lady. She's free to choose for herself."
"Is she?" cried Baldwin. "As between two brothers of the lodge, I should say that she was," said the boss.
"Oh, that's your ruling, is it?"
"Yes, it is, Ted Baldwin," said McGinty, with a wicked stare. "Is it you that would dispute it?"
"You would throw over one that has stood by you this 5 years in favour of a man that you never saw before in your life? You're not bodymaster for life, Jack McGinty, and by God, when next it comes to a vote—" The councillor sprang at him like a tiger. His hand closed round the other's neck, and he hurled him back across one of the barrels. In his mad fury he would have squeezed the life out of him if McMurdo had not interfered. "Easy, Councillor! For heaven's sake, go easy!" he cried as he dragged him back. McGinty released his hold, and Baldwin, cowed and shaken, gasping for breath and shivering in every limb, as one who has looked over the very edge of death, sat up on the barrel over which he had been hurled.
"You've been asking for it this many a day, Ted Baldwin. Now you've got it," cried McGinty, his huge chest rising and falling. "Maybe you think if I was voted down from bodymaster, you'd find yourself in my shoes. It's for the lodge to say that, but so long as I'm the chief, I'll have no man lift his voice against me or my rulings."
"I have nothing against you," mumbled Baldwin, feeling his throat.
"Well, then," cried the other, relapsing in a moment into a bluff joviality, "we're all good friends again, and there's an end of the matter."
He took a bottle of champagne down from the shelf and twisted out the cork.
"See now," he continued as he filled 3 high glasses, "let us drink the quarrelling toast of the lodge. After that, as you know, there can be no bad blood between us. Now then, the left hand on the apple of my throat. I say to you, Ted Baldwin, what is the offence, sir?"
"The clouds are heavy," answered Baldwin.
"But they will forever brighten."
"And this I swear." The men drank their glasses, and the same ceremony was performed between Baldwin and McMurdo.
"There," cried McGinty, rubbing his hands, "that's the end of the black blood. You come under lodge discipline if it goes further, and that's a heavy hand in these parts, as brother Baldwin knows. and as you will damn soon find out, Brother McMurdo, if you ask for trouble."
"Faith, I'd be slow to do that," said McMurdo. He held out his hand to Baldwin. "I'm quick to quarrel, and quick to forgive. It's my hot Irish blood, they tell me, but it's over for me, and I bear no grudge." Baldwin had to take the proffered hand, for the baleful eye of the terrible boss was upon him. But his sullen face showed how little the words of the other had moved him. McGinty clapped them both on the shoulders.
"Tut, these girls, he cried. "To think that the same petticoat should come between two of my boys. It's the devil's own luck. Well, it's the colleen inside of them that must settle the question, for it's outside the jurisdiction of a bodymaster, and the Lord be praised for that. We have enough on us without the women as well. You'll have to be affiliated to Lodge 341, Brother McMurdo. We have our own ways and methods, different from Chicago. Saturday night is our meeting, and if you come then, we'll make you free forever of the Vermissa Valley."
End of Chapter 2. Part 2, Chapter 3 of The Valley of Fear by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3. Lodge 341, Vermissa. On the day following the evening which had contained so many exciting events, McMurdo moved his lodgings from old Jacob Shafter's and took up his quarters at the widow Macnamara's on the extreme outskirts of the town. Scanlon, his original acquaintance aboard the train, had occasion shortly afterwards to move into Vermissa, and the two lodged together. There was no other boarder, and the hostess was an easy-going old Irish woman, who left them to themselves, so that they had a freedom for speech and action welcome to men who had secrets in common. Shafter had relented to the extent of letting McMurdo come to his meals there when he liked, so that his intercourse with Etty was by no means broken. On the contrary, it drew closer and more intimate as the weeks went by. In his bedroom at his new abode, McMurdo felt it safe to take out the coining moulds, and under many a pledge of secrecy a number of brothers from the lodge were allowed to come in and see them, each carrying away in his pocket some examples of the false money, so cunningly struck that there was never the slightest difficulty or danger in passing it. Why, with such a wonderful art at his command, McMurdo should condescend to work at all was a perpetual mystery to his companions, though he made it clear to anyone who asked him that if he lived without any visible means it would very quickly bring the police upon his track. One policeman was indeed after him already, but the incident, as luck would have it, did the adventurer a great deal more good than harm. After the first introduction there were few evenings when he did not find his way to McGinty's saloon, there to make closer acquaintance with "the boys," which was the jovial title by which the dangerous gang who infested the place were known to one another. His dashing manner and fearlessness of speech made him a favourite with them all, while the rapid and scientific way in which he polished off his antagonist in an all-in bar-room scrap earned the respect of that rough community. Another incident, however, raised him even higher in their estimation. Just at the crowded hour one night, the door opened, and a man entered with the quiet blue uniform and peaked cap of the mine police. This was a special body, raised by the railways and colliery owners to supplement the efforts of the ordinary civil police, who were perfectly helpless in the face of the organised ruffianism which terrorised the district. There was a hush as he entered, and many a curious glance was cast at him, but the relations between policemen and criminals are peculiar in some parts of the States, and McGinty himself, standing behind his counter, showed no surprise when the policeman enrolled himself among his customers. "A straight whisky for the night is bitter," said the police officer. "I don't think we've met before, councillor."
"You'll be the new captain," said McGinty.
"That's so. We're looking to you, councillor, and to the other leading citizens,
to help us in upholding law and order in this township. Captain Marvin is my name." "We do better without you, Captain Marvin, for we have our own police of the township, and no need for any imported goods. What are you but the paid tool of the capitalists, hired by them to club or shoot your poorer fellow citizen?" "Well, well, we won't argue about that," said the police officer good-humouredly. "I expect we all do our duty same as we see it, but we can't all see it the same." He'd drunk off his glass and had turned to go when his eyes fell upon the face of Jack McMurdo, who was scowling at his elbow. "Hello, hello!" he cried, looking him up and down. "Here's an old acquaintance." McMurdo shrank away from him. "I was never a friend to you, nor any other cursed copper in my life," said he. "An acquaintance isn't always a friend," said the police captain, grinning. "You're Jack McMurdo of Chicago right enough, and don't you deny it." McMurdo shrugged his shoulders. "I'm not denying it," said he. "Do you think I'm ashamed of my own name?" "You've got good cause to be, anyhow." "What the devil do you mean by that?" he roared with his fist clenched. "No, no, Jack, bluster won't do with me. I was an officer in Chicago before ever I came to this darned coal bunker, and I know a Chicago crook when I see one." McMurdo's face fell. "Don't tell me that you're Marvin of the Chicago Central," he cried. "Just the same old Teddy Marvin at your service. We haven't forgotten the shooting of Jonas Pinto up there." "I never shot him." "Did you not? That's good impartial evidence, ain't it? Well, his death came in uncommon handy for you, or they would have had you for shoving the queer. Well, we can let that be bygones, for between you and me, and perhaps I'm going further than my duty in saying it, they could get no clear case against you, and Chicago's open to you tomorrow." "I'm very well where I am." "Well, I've given you the pointer, and you're a sulky dog not to thank me for it." "Well, I suppose you mean well, and I do thank you," said McMurdo in no very gracious manner. "It's mum with me so long as I see you living on the straight," said the captain. "But by the Lord, if you get off after this, it's another story. So good night to you, and good night, councillor." He left the bar-room, but not before he'd created a local hero. McMurdo's deeds in far Chicago had been whispered before. He'd put off all questions with a smile, as one who did not wish to have greatness thrust upon him. But now the thing was officially confirmed. The bar loafers crowded round him and shook him heartily by the hand. He was free of the community from that time on. He could drink hard and show little trace of it. But that evening, had his mate Scanlon not been at hand to lead him home, the fated hero would surely have spent his night under the bar. On a Saturday night McMurdo was introduced to the lodge. He had thought to pass in without ceremony as being an initiate of Chicago, but there were particular rites in Vermissa of which they were proud, and these had to be undergone by every postulant. The assembly met in a large room reserved for such purposes at the Union House. Some 60 members assembled at Vermissa, but that by no means represented the full strength of the organisation, for there were several other lodges in the valley, and others across the mountains on each side, who exchanged members when any serious business was afoot, so that a crime might be done by men who were strangers to the locality. Altogether, there were not less than 500 scattered over the coal district. In the bare assembly room, the men were gathered round a long table. At the side was a second one, laden with bottles and glasses, on which some members of the company were already turning their eyes. McGinty sat at the head, with a flat black velvet cap upon his shock of tangled black hair, and a coloured purple stole round his neck, so that he seemed to be a priest presiding over some diabolical ritual. To right and left of him were the higher lodge officials, the cruel, handsome face of Ted Baldwin among them. Each of these wore some scarf or medallion as emblem of his office. They were, for the most part, men of mature age, but the rest of the company consisted of young fellows from 18 to 25, the ready and capable agents who carried out the commands of their seniors. Among the older men were many whose features showed the tigerish, lawless souls within, but looking at the rank and file, it was difficult to believe that these eager and open-faced young fellows were in very truth a dangerous gang of murderers, whose minds had suffered such complete moral perversion that they took a horrible pride in their proficiency at the business, and looked with deepest respect at the men who had the reputation of making what they called a clean job. To their contorted natures it had become a spirited and chivalrous thing to volunteer for service against some man who had never injured them, and whom in many cases they had never seen in their lives. The crime committed, they quarrelled as to who had actually struck the fatal blow, and amused one another and the company by describing the cries and contortions of the murdered man. At first they had shown some secrecy in their arrangements, but at the time which this narrative describes, their proceedings were extraordinarily open, for the repeated failure of the law had proved to them that on the one hand no one would dare to witness against them, and on the other they had an unlimited number of stanch witnesses upon whom they could call, and a well-filled treasure chest from which they could draw the funds to engage the best legal talent in the state. In 10 long years of outrage there had been no single conviction, and the only danger that ever threatened the scourers lay in the victim himself, who, however outnumbered and taken by surprise, might and occasionally did leave his mark upon his assailants. MacMurdo had been warned that some ordeal lay before him, but no one would tell him in what it consisted. He was led now into an outer room by 2 solemn brothers. Through the plank partition he could hear the murmur of many voices from the assembly within. Once or twice he caught the sound of his own name, and he knew that they were discussing his candidacy. Then there entered an inner guard with a green and gold sash across his chest. "The bodymaster orders that he shall be trussed, blinded, and entered," said he. The 3 of them removed his coat, turned up the sleeve of his right arm, and finally passed a rope around above the elbows and made it fast. They next placed a thick black cap right over his head and the upper part of his face, so that he could see nothing. He was then led into the assembly hall. It was pitch dark, and very oppressive under his hood. He heard the rustle and murmur of the people round him, and then the voice of McGinty sounded dull and distant through the covering of his ears. "John MacMurdo," said the voice, "are you already a member of the ancient order of freemen?" He bowed his assent. "Is your lodge number 29, Chicago?" He bowed again. "Dark nights are unpleasant," said the voice. "Yes, for strangers to travel," he answered. "The clouds are heavy." "Yes, a storm is approaching." "Are the brethren satisfied?" asked the bodymaster. There was a general murmur of assent. "We know, brother, by your sign and by your countersign, that you are indeed one of us," said McGinty. "We would have you know, however, that in this county and in other counties of these parts we have certain rights, and also certain duties of our own which call for good men. Are you ready to be tested?" "I am." "Are you of stout heart?" "I am." "Take a stride forward to prove it." As the words were said, he felt 2 hard points in front of his eyes pressing upon them, so that it appeared as if he could not move forward without a danger of losing them. None the less, he nerved himself to step resolutely out, and as he did so the pressure melted away. There was a low murmur of applause. "He is of a stout heart," said the voice. "Can you bear pain?" "As well as another," he answered. "Test him." It was all he could do to keep himself from screaming out, for an agonizing pain shot through his forearm. He nearly fainted at the sudden shock of it, but he bit his lip and clenched his hands to hide his agony. "I can take more than that," said he. This time there was loud applause. A finer first appearance had never been made in the lodge. Hands clapped him on the back, and the hood was plucked from his head. He stood blinking and smiling amid the congratulations of the brothers. "One last word, Brother McMurdo," said McGinty. "You have already sworn the oath of secrecy and fidelity, and you are aware that the punishment for any breach of it is instant and inevitable death."
"I am," said
McMurdo. "And you accept the rule of the Bodymaster, for the time being, under all circumstances?"
"I do."
"Then, in the name of Lodge 341 Vermissa, I welcome you to its privileges and debates. You will put the liquor on the table, Brother Scanlon, and we will drink to our worthy brother."
McMurdo's coat had been brought to him, but before putting it on he examined his right arm, which still smarted heavily. There on the flesh of the forearm was a circle with a triangle within it, deep and red as the branding iron had left it. One of the two of his neighbours pulled up their sleeves and showed their own lodge marks.
"We've all had it," said one, "but not all as brave as you over it."
"Tut, it was nothing," said he, but it burned and ached all the same. When the drinks which followed the ceremony of initiation had all been disposed of, the business of the lodge proceeded. McMurdo, accustomed only to the prosaic performances of Chicago, listened with open ears and more surprise than he ventured to show to what followed.
"The first business on the agenda paper," said McGinty, "is to read the following letter from Division Master Windle of Merton County Lodge 249. He says, 'Dear Sir, there is a job to be done on Andrew Ray, of Ray and Sturmish, coal owners near this place. You will remember that your lodge owes us a return, having had the service of two brethren in the matter of the patrolman last fall. You will send 2 good men. They will be taken charge of by Treasurer Higgins of this lodge, whose address you know. He will show them when to act and where. Yours in freedom, J. W. Windle, D.M.A.O.F. Windle has never refused us when we have had occasion to ask for the loan of a man or two, and it's not for us to refuse him."
McGinty paused and looked round the room with his dull, malevolent eyes.
"Who will volunteer for the job?"
Several young fellows held up their hands. The Bodymaster looked at them with an approving smile.
"You'll do, Tiger Cormac. If you handle it as well as you did the last, you won't be wrong. And you, Wilson."
"I've no pistol," said the volunteer, a mere boy in his teens.
"It's your first, is it not? Well, you have to be blooded sometime. It'll be a great start for you. As to the pistol, you'll find it waiting for you, or I'm mistaken. If you report yourselves on Monday, it'll be time enough. You'll get a great welcome when you return."
"Any reward this time?" asked Cormac, a thick-set, dark-faced, brutal-looking young man whose ferocity had earned him the nickname of Tiger.
"Never mind the reward. You just do it for the honour of the thing. Maybe when it's done there'll be a few odd dollars at the bottom of the box."
"What has the man done?" asked the young Wilson.
"Sure it's not for the likes of you to ask what the man has done. He's been judged over there. That's no business of ours. All we have to do is to carry it out for them, same as they would for us. Speaking of that, 2 brothers from the Merton Lodge are coming over to us next week to do some business in this quarter."
"Who are they?" asked someone.
"Faith, It is wiser not to ask. If you know nothing, you can testify nothing, and no trouble can come of it. But they are men who will make a clean job when they're about it." "And time, too," cried Ted Baldwin. "Folk are getting out of hand in these parts. It was only last week that 3 of our men were turned off by Foreman Blaker. It's been owing him a long time, and he'll get it full and proper." "Get what?" McMurdo whispered to his neighbour. "The business end of a buckshot cartridge," cried the man with a loud laugh. "What think you of our ways, brother?" McMurdo's criminal soul seemed to have already absorbed the spirit of the vile association of which he was now a member. "I like it well," said he. "'Tis a proper place for a lad of metal." Several of those who sat around heard his words and applauded them. "What's that?" cried the black-maned bodymaster from the end of the table. "'Tis our new brother, sir, who finds our ways to his taste." McMurdo rose to his feet for an instant. "I would say, eminent bodymaster, that if a man should be wanted, I should take it as an honour to be chosen to help the lodge." There was great applause at this. It was felt that a new sun was pushing its rim above the horizon. To some of the elders it seemed that the progress was a little too rapid. "I would move," said the Secretary Harraway, a vulture-faced old greybeard who sat near the chairman, "that Brother McMurdo should wait until it is the good pleasure of the lodge to employ him." "Sure, that was what I meant. I'm in your hands," said McMurdo. "Your time will come, brother," said the chairman. "We have marked you down as a willing man, and we believe that you will do good work in these parts. There is a small matter tonight in which you may take a hand, if it so please you." "I'll wait for something that is worth while." "You can come tonight anyhow, and it will help you to know what we stand for in this community. I will make the announcement later. Meanwhile," he glanced at his agenda paper, "I have 1 or 2 more points to bring before the meeting. First of all, I will ask the treasurer as to our bank balance. There is the pension to Jim Carnaway's widow. He was struck down during the work of the lodge, and it is for us to see that she is not the loser. Jim was shot last month when they tried to kill Chester Wilcox of Marley Creek," McMurdo's neighbour informed him. "The funds are good at the moment," said the treasurer with the bank book in front of him. "The firms have been generous of late. Max Linder & Co. paid $500 to be left alone. Walker Brothers sent in $100, but I took it on myself to return it and ask for $5. If I do not hear by Wednesday, their winding gear may get out of order. We had to burn their breaker last year before they became reasonable. Then the West Section Coaling Company has paid its annual contribution. We have enough on hand to meet any obligations." "What about Archie Swindon?" asked a brother. "He has sold out and left the district. The old devil left a note for us to say that he'd had rather be a free crossing sweeper in a New York than a large mine owner under the power of a ring of blackmailers. By gar, it was as well that he made a break for it before the note reached us. I guess he won't show his face in this valley again." An elderly, clean-shaved man with a kindly face and a good brow rose from the end of the table which faced the chairman. "Mr. Treasurer," he asked, "may I ask who has bought the property of this man that we have driven out of the district?" "Yes, Brother Morris. It has been bought by the State and Merton County Railroad Company." "And who bought the mines of Todman and of Lee that came into the market in the same way last year?" "The same company, Brother Morris." "And who bought the ironworks of Manson and of Schumann and of Vandeer and of Atwood, which have all been given up of late?" "They were all bought by the West Gilmerton General Mining Company." "I don't see, Brother Morris," said the chairman, "that it matters to us who buys them, since they can't carry them out of the district." "With all respect to you, eminent bodymaster, I think it may matter very much to us. This process has been going on now for 10 long years. We are gradually driving all the small men out of trade. What is the result? We find in their places great companies like the railroad or the General Iron, who have their directors in New York or Philadelphia, and care nothing for our threats. We can take it out of their local bosses, but it only means that others will be sent in their stead, and we are making it dangerous for ourselves. The small men could not harm us. They had not the money nor the power. So long as we did not squeeze them too dry, they would stay on under our power. But if these big companies find that we stand between them and their profits, they will spare no pains and no expense to hunt us down and bring us to court." There was a hush at these ominous words, and every face darkened as gloomy looks were exchanged. So omnipotent and unchallenged had they been, that the very thought that there was possible retribution in the background had been banished from their minds, and yet the idea struck a chill to the most reckless of them. "It is my advice," the speaker continued, "that we go easier upon the small men. On the day that they have all been driven out, the power of this society will have been broken." Unwelcome truths are not popular. There were angry cries as the speaker resumed his seat. McGinty rose with gloom upon his brow. "Brother Morris," said he, "you were always a croaker. So long as the members of this lodge stand together, there is no power in the United States that can touch them. Sure, have we not tried it often enough in the law courts? I expect the big companies will find it easier to pay than to fight, same as the little companies do. And now, brethren," McGinty took off his black velvet cap and his stole as he spoke, "this lodge has finished its business for the evening, save for one small matter which may be mentioned when we are parting. The time has now come for fraternal refreshment and for harmony." Strange indeed is human nature. Here were these men, to whom murder was familiar, who again and again had struck down the father of the family, some man against whom they had no personal feeling, without one thought of compunction or of compassion for his weeping wife or helpless children, and yet the tender or pathetic in music could move them to tears. McMurdo had a fine tenor voice, and if he had failed to gain the good-will of the lodge before, it could no longer have been withheld after he had thrilled them with "I am sitting on the stile Mary" and "On the banks of Allan Water." In his very first night, the new recruit had made himself one of the most popular of the brethren, marked already for advancement and high office. There were other qualities needed, however, besides those of good fellowship, to make a worthy freeman, and of these he was given an example before the evening was over. The whisky bottle had passed round many times, and the men were flushed and ripe for mischief when their bodymaster rose once more to address them. "Boys," said he, "there's one man in this town that wants trimming up, and it's for you to see that he gets it. I'm speaking of James Stanger of the Herald. You've seen how he's been opening his mouth against us again?" There was a murmur of assent, with many a muttered oath. McGinty took a slip of paper from his waistcoat pocket. "Law and order. That's how he heads it. Reign of terror in the coal and iron district. 12 years have now elapsed since the first assassinations which prove the existence of a criminal organization in our midst. From that day these outrages have never ceased, until now they have reached a pitch which makes us the opprobrium of the civilized world. Is it for such results as this that our great country welcomes to its bosom the alien who flies from the despotisms of Europe? Is it that they shall themselves become tyrants over the very men who have given them shelter, and that a state of terrorism and lawlessness should be established under the very shadow of the sacred folds of the starry flag of freedom, which would raise horror in our minds if we read of it as existing under the most effete monarchy of the East? The men are known. The organization is patent and public. How long are we to endure it? Can we forever live? "Sure, I've read enough of the slush," cried the chairman, tossing the paper down upon the table. "That's what he says of us. The question I'm asking is, what shall we say to him?" "Kill him!" cried a dozen fierce voices.
"I protest against that," said Brother Morris, the man of the good brow and shaved face. "I tell you, brethren, that our hand is too heavy in this valley, and that there will come a point where in self-defence every man will unite to crush us out. James Stanger is an old man. He is respected in the township and the district. His paper stands for all that is solid in the valley. If that man is struck down, there will be a stir through this state that will only end with our destruction."
"And how would they bring about our destruction, Mr. Standback?" cried McGinty. "Is it by the police? Sure, half of them are in our pay, and half of them are afraid of us. Or is it by the law courts and the judge? Haven't we tried that before now, and whatever came of it?"
"There is a Judge Lynch that might try the case," said Brother Morris. A general shout of anger greeted the suggestion.
"I have but to raise my finger," cried McGinty, "and I could put 200 men into this town that would clear it out from end to end."
Then suddenly raising his voice and bending his huge black brows into a terrible frown,
"See here, Brother Morris, I have my eye on you, and have had for some time. You've no heart yourself, and you try to take the heart out of others. It will be an ill day for you, Brother Morris, when your own name comes on our agenda paper, and I'm thinking that it's just there that I ought to place it."
Morris had turned deadly pale, and his knees seemed to give way under him as he fell back into his chair. He raised his glass in his trembling hand, and drank before he could answer. "I apologize, eminent Bodymaster, to you and to every brother in this lodge, if I have said more than I should. I am a faithful member, you all know that, and it is my fear lest evil come to the lodge which makes me speak in anxious words. But I have greater trust in your judgment than in my own, eminent Bodymaster, and I promise you that I will not offend again." The Bodymaster's scowl relaxed as he listened to the humble words.
"Very good, Brother Morris. It's myself that would be sorry if it were needful to give you a lesson. But so long as I am in this chair, we shall be a united lodge in word and in deed. And now, boys," he continued, looking round at the company, "I'll say this much, that if Stanger got his full deserts there would be more trouble than we need ask for. These editors hang together, and every journal in the state would be crying out for police and troops. But I guess you can give him a pretty severe warning. Will you fix it, Brother Baldwin?"
"Sure," said the young man eagerly.
"How many will you take?"
"Half a dozen, and 2 to guard the door. You'll come, Gower, and you, Mansell, and you, Scanlon, and the 2 Willoughbys."
"I promised the new brother he should go," said the chairman.
Ted Baldwin looked at McMurdo with eyes which showed that he had not forgotten nor forgiven.
"Well, he can come if he wants," he said in a surly voice. "That's enough. The sooner we get to work the better."
The company broke up with shouts and yells and snatches of drunken song. The bar was still crowded with revellers, and many of the brethren remained there. The little band who had been told off for duty passed out into the street, proceeding in 2s and 3s along the sidewalk so as not to provoke attention. It was a bitterly cold night, with a half-moon shining brilliantly in a frosty, star-spangled sky. The men stopped and gathered in a yard which faced a high building. The words "Vermissa Herald" were printed in gold lettering between the brightly lit windows. From within came the clanking of the printing press. "Here you," said Baldwin to McMurdo. "You can stand below at the door and see that the road is kept open for us. Arthur Willoughby can stay with you. You others come with me. Have no fears, boys,
for we have a dozen witnesses that we are in the Union Bar at this very moment." It was nearly midnight, and the street was deserted, save for one or two revellers upon their way home. The party crossed the road, and, pushing open the door of the newspaper office, Baldwin and his men rushed in and up the stair which faced them. McMurdo and another remained below. From the room above came a shout, a cry for help, and then the sound of trampling feet and of falling chairs. An instant later, a grey-haired man rushed out on the landing. He was seized before he could get farther, and his spectacles came tinkling down to McMurdo's feet. There was a thud and a groan. He was on his face, and half a dozen sticks were clattering together as they fell upon him. He writhed, and his long, thin limbs quivered under the blows. The others ceased at last, but Baldwin, his cruel face set in an infernal smile, was hacking at the man's head, which he vainly endeavoured to defend with his arms. His white hair was dabbled with patches of blood. Baldwin was still stooping over his victim, putting in a short, vicious blow whenever he could see a part exposed, when McMurdo dashed up the stair and pushed him back. "You'll kill the man," said he. "Drop it." Baldwin looked at him in amazement. "Curse you!" he cried. "Who are you to interfere? You that are new to the lodge. Stand back." He raised his stick, but McMurdo had whipped his pistol out of his pocket. "Stand back yourself," he cried. "I'll blow your face in if you lay a hand on me. As to the lodge, wasn't it the order of the bodymaster that the man was not to be killed? And what are you doing but killing him?" "It's truth he says," remarked one of the men. "By gar, you'd best hurry yourselves," cried the man below. "The windows are all lighting up, and you'll have the whole town here inside of 5 minutes." There was indeed the sound of shouting in the street, and a little group of compositors and pressmen was forming in the hall below, and nerving itself to action. Leaving the limp and motionless body of the editor at the head of the stair, the criminals rushed down and made their way swiftly along the street. Having reached the Union House, some of them, mixed with the crowd in McGinty's saloon, whispering across the bar to the boss that the job had been well carried through. Others, and among them McMurdo, broke away into side streets, and so by devious paths to their own homes. End of chapter 3.